Well, I would like to thank Kentucky Bat Working Group for providing me the opportunity to recognize the first Lifetime Achievement Award recipient. Like these Virginia Big Ear bats, please open your ears and listen to this year's recipient's accomplishments. This year's recipient's vast knowledge of the flora and fauna of the eastern United States, and specifically Kentucky, is unprecedented, and his willingness to share this information with others is equally impressive. Like many of us, this year's recipient's interest in natural history started when he was a child. However, his interest in bats did not begin until 1972, when he entered the Masters of Science program at the University of Kentucky. Under the tutelage of Dr. Roger Barber and Dr. Wayne Davis, the early pioneers of bat research in North America, he would take the time away from his water snake graduate research project to venture into the many caves along the Kentucky River Palisades to photograph and study the winter ecology of cave bats. Over the past 50 years, this year's recipient has become the leading authority on the natural history and management of endangered bats in Kentucky and many adjacent states. Unlike today, in the 80s and 90s, few biologists were interested in completing winter bat counts in Kentucky. However, this year's recipient was always able to find some unknowing soul, example, game wardens Jerry Coots and Cordell Gayhart, and there's a story for that later on tonight, to at least accompany him on these counts. The early knowledge of bat populations has been so valuable in today's protection of these species, thus making this year's recipients one of the real pioneers in bat research, monitoring, conservation, and management. He, along with Bob Curry and Roy Powers, completed assessments and successfully protected dozens of caves harboring populations of endangered bats by constructing bat-friendly gates during the 1980s and 1990s. While serving as Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources' first non-game biologist and Endangered Species Program from 1981 to 1990, he initiated regular population monitoring of caves harboring colonies of rare and/or endangered bats, developed a database to help keep track of bat and herp data, and maintain some of the first county distribution maps for bats in the eastern United States. Today, this type of effort may be standard protocol and simplistic due to the technology available, but in the 80s, it was a pioneering effort. When put into proper temporal context, this effort is even more amazing. The amount of data collected, analyzed, and tracked by him and a single assistant is staggering, given the lack of interest and funding at that time for bat and herp surveys. Without these early population data, there would be a huge gap in species distribution maps and our understanding of early population levels for Indiana bat and gray bat. Until recently, within the past 14 years, he continued to spend much of the winters conducting hibernacular counts at caves throughout Kentucky, tallying the numbers of bats for each species present. Much of the monitoring data collected on endangered species, especially the Indiana bat, has been invaluable to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Indiana Bat Recovery Team, and played an integral role in the development of the most recent version of the Indiana Bat Recovery Plan. His early data is now proving to be critical for potential listing of the eastern pipistrelle. And yes, I did say eastern pipistrelle. When other biologists in other states were only recording listed bat species, this year's recipient recorded everything he observed in a cave, down to the new graffiti on the cave walls. This year's recipient has represented Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources and the U.S. Forest Service on the Indiana Bat Recovery Team. He has spent many tireless nights and much of his personal time reviewing draft versions of the Indiana Bat Recovery Plan and/or traveling to multi-agency meetings to discuss bat conservation and management. He has also volunteered countless hours preparing and giving oral presentations at government-sponsored trainings, professional meetings such as SBDN, Kentucky Bat Working Group, Kentucky Academy of Science, North American Bat Symposium on Bat Research, and educational weekends like the HERP and the Wildflower Weekends. He recently received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Southeastern Bat Diversity Network. And as David Soji stated about this year's recipient, quote, He has spread the gospel of bats to thousands and thousands of people using his unique presentation style supported by truly remarkable photographs, unquote. A trademark of his presentations is that they are always entertaining, visually stimulating, and educational. One such presentation entitled The Use of Road Ruts as Water Sources by Bats in Eastern Kentucky contained a photograph that took many attempts and some fancy early 1990s technology to obtain. This photograph was only one of a million photos that he has taken, but one of the most important because it showed a bat drinking from a muddy road rut, which helped reshape how biologists conducted summer mistnet surveys for bats in the mountainous terrains of the eastern United States. This presentation provided not only the necessary data, but also the visual validation demonstrating the need to survey bats in a new way, netting road ruts on dry ridge tops versus the standard method of the time, which focused almost exclusively on string corridors. Bat data collected by surveying ridgetop road ruts captured many more northern long-eared bats, which eventually led to them being delisted from almost all state rare species lists. One of his most notable accomplishments in bat conservation and management was the development of the cliffline policy on the Daniel Boone National Forest. This policy was drafted prior to any literature having been published concerning the importance of microhabitats associated with clifflines, especially as they relate to the roosting and foraging habits of the Virginia and Raffenest big-eared bats. His vast knowledge of the flora and fauna of these habitats provided enough unpublished information in the late 1980s to formulate the policy. Later, studies on these two species of bats, along with the eastern small-footed bat and other cliffline-dependent species, proved his random and non-statistical field observations were accurate in terms of determining the importance of clifflines to the local bat fauna. And this is one of the SBDN meetings people's favorite photographs of his use of different things for scale. So,
you can show someone the size of a hobo tent back then. I'm more familiar with making dog food.
Oh, today more than 3,700 miles of cliffline encompassing approximately 111,000 acres in the Daniel Boone National Forest are protected, managed to support habitat for populations of flora and fauna, including numerous species of rare bats. This achievement was a result of his early commitment to do what was ecologically right instead of what was politically right. He was also responsible for developing the bat conservation management and protection measures found in the revised Land and Resource Management Plan for the Daniel Boone National Forest, dated 2003. Some of the bat protective measures found in the plan include Indiana bat roost tree, retentions, buffers around the endangered bat summer roost and hibernacula, establishment of upland water sources, management of forest communities to improve bat habitat and continued protection of cliffline habitats. This plan is the most progressive in the country in regards to the conservation, management, and protection of rare bats. Since the plan's inception, many other southeastern national forests have patterned their plans after the Daniel Boone National Forest because of his proactive and progressive approach toward rare species. His effort with protecting bats is best described by Dennis Kruzak, the Southern Region Endangered Species Biologist for the U.S. Forest Service. Quote, John single-handedly changed bat conservation for the better on national forests in the eastern U.S., unquote. While on the Daniel Boone National Forest, this year's recipient, along with a fellow Forest Service biologist, Dan Dorson, created the post-bat house design, AK rocket-style bat box, which was patterned after a natural Indiana bat roost tree. The bat box has been the most successful design for attracting northern long-eared bats and has even been used by some Indiana bats. He, along with Hal Bryan, developed the first guidance document on how to safely complete external evaluations for endangered bat habitat at abandoned underground coal mines. They were able to successfully describe important characteristics of abandoned underground mines by foolishly crawling around inside these structures looking for bats in the 1980s. I would not recommend that today. In addition, he also co-authored papers concerning how to capture Indiana bats on coal mine projects, the use of concrete bridges by Indiana bats as night roosts, and roost site fidelity of Indiana bats. This year's recipient has influenced a large number of young biologists and seasoned biologists alike with his knowledge and eagerness to assist them with research projects and by sharing a half a century of data, general observations, and photographs. He has spent many a night radio tracking Indiana bats as a volunteer until 3 o'clock in the morning and then show up in the office the next morning for his everyday work. His dedication to do these types of crazy things just to learn more about eastern forest bats and to improve bat conservation puts him above all others. Any biologist who has spent much time with him will quickly respect his ability to function on very little rest and his love for knowledge of natural history. On a more personal note, this year's recipient has contributed a great deal to my career and continues to shape me as a biologist by sharing a wealth of natural history knowledge. As I announce the first recipient of the Kentucky Bat Working Group Lifetime Achievement Award, I must first thank his wonderful wife, Lois, who is not here today with us, for sharing his time and talent with all of us for the last half a century. I am honored to present to you my best friend and mentor, Mr. John Roy MacGregor II, as the first recipient of the Kentucky Bat Working Group's Lifetime Achievement Award. From here on out, this award will be known as the John R. MacGregor Lifetime Achievement Award and will only be presented when Kentucky Bat Working Group officers receive exceptional nominations. John?
That's beautiful.
Thanks for everything.
Oh, hey, thank you. You know that old
And the
guy,
shirt come along with it too. I bought this for you. I seen it and thought you'd like it.
you know the old guy standing next to me in that last picture you showed? That's Jim Butler.
Yeah.
He took me to Stillhouse Cave for the first time in 1969 when I still lived in Ohio. So that day we went to Stillhouse and we went to Johnson Cave, and I was more excited about the Rafinesques in Johnson than I was the Virginias and Stillhouse, because we only saw a couple of Rafinesques in Johnson. We saw, 600 or 800 Virginias. Thanks. Appreciate it. I don't deserve this, but I really do appreciate it.
You're welcome. You do deserve it. How many in the audience has ever been out netting with John in person? Okay.
That's scary.
Keep your hands up. So how many in the audience has been out netting with one of the people that's got their hands up? Okay, what about that group? So about everybody in here is actually kind of on the tree, John's tree of generational hand-downs, and I personally really enjoy the history of what we do. A lot of us got into this because, it was a way to pay bills and do biology and have a job. When I first started and first met John, there was very little opportunities in this field, unlike today. And so I have always really appreciated the history and the wealth of knowledge that John has had. And I recommend, as members in this group get gray-headed and lose their hair, to really ask them a lot of questions, because once that knowledge is gone, we will never recover. So, thanks for everything, John.
Okay.